Hello and welcome to this video tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and today we're going to be tackling what is perhaps the single most requested tutorial topic throughout Blender Cookie's history, and in fact actually throughout my entire history as a tutorial author, and that is the modeling of a car. And in this case, we're going to be modeling the very sleek Porsche 911 GTR, I believe it is. As you can see here, the GT3 RS, type 997. And the images that we're going to be using are from the Diecast Cars group Flickr page, as they are all licensed under Creative Commons. As you can see here, we have a good few to choose from, and these will, of course, all be included in the source files. And what we're going to be doing, this will be a multi-part tutorial. And in this first section, we're going to begin by trying to model the entire front section of the car. As you can see in Blender, I've already set up my background image with two of them that I have picked out, and that is the front view and the side view. Now, there's a couple things we need to keep in mind when modeling from these images. First and foremost is that due to the perspective from a camera, they're not going to be completely accurate, and so you can't follow the images to the T. You have to approximate between the two images and try and get the ideal shape between the two. And this is best done by using a series of images, which fortunately for us are provided by this Flickr group here. And so we have a good few to choose from that give us a lot of different angles to compare our model to, and that will really help in the modeling process. And then I have also pulled in one other image here, which you can see that is a much higher resolution that allows us to see a lot of the fine details, since the other ones are fairly low res and we're not able to see nearly as much. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in on Blender. But before we actually get started modeling, I want to do a couple of things. First off, you'll notice that I've loaded up the background images. However, there's still a couple things to do. For one, the background images aren't lined up. And two, I want to actually create a third image that will allow me to switch to very easily to get a good perspective view of it and to see the details. And we're actually going to use the orange version of the car that I just showed you as that. But first, on lining up the images, what we want to do is line it up to the best of our ability such that most of the details coincide between the two. And so the easiest way to do this is, one, using the X and Y offsets, and then also, of course, the size, and using a mesh, in this case, the default cube that we're going to be using, as a measurement tool to line the two up. So first, to get the images lined up as best as possible, what I'm going to do is move the image up such that the bottom of the car, which I can see on both sides, is lined up with the Y and X axis. So first, on the right side, we're just going to move it up along the Y until it lines up perfectly. And in this case, it's right about there. And we might even take it down, say, 2.85. There we go. And then on this case, it's going to be probably fairly close to that, so we'll just do 2.85. And you can see that's pretty darn close. Okay, this is good, but I'm actually going to change what I said. I'm actually going to line it up with the bottom of the fog lights here, as this is a more distinct point that we can see clearly on both sides. So we're going to go ahead and move this down a little bit. And we'll maybe go 2.2. Oh, nope, 2.1. There we are. And we'll take this one right down. And we want to line it up with the right side here. Okay, that's going to be pretty darn close. So we're going to leave it at that. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and, using our cube here, we're going to take it into edit mode, and we're going to line it up with a few of the key points from the side view. Since our side view is the most straight on image, that's the one that we're going to use in this case. So I'm just going to grab the top here by using my box select with B, left click and dragging, and then I'm just going to hit G to pull it up to the top of the car, and then I'm also going to take this over, line it up with the bottom of the wheels. Let's add in a loop cut by Control R and then left click, and let's put it in on the bottom of the headlights here. As you can see, right about there is the bottom of the inset. And then let's also line one up right at the top of the mirror. This is just several different reference points along the side that we can then compare on this side. And you'll immediately notice that it's way, way off. The headlights are actually pretty close, whereas the mirror on the top of the car are way off. And what this tells us is that the camera is at a slightly up and pointing down perspective. So you're getting a slight top view of the car versus a straight on like you're getting on the side view. And so what this means is that the side view is, since it's our more accurate reference, we're going to need to use it to line up our details and the proportions of our car, and then just use this as more of a reference to kind of see placement. But let's go ahead and we're going to scale this down a little bit just to make it fit so we can, model things a little easier. And so let's just go ahead and scale down. We'll just scale down 1, and then we need to line this back up. In this case, this is going to be the bottom of the wheel, so it'll be right about there. And then you can see that the top lines up pretty well. The mirrors are pretty darn close, and the headlights are pretty darn close. So that's about as close as we're going to get. And so we're going to go ahead and leave it at that. And at this point, we can go ahead and just delete our cube, since it's all skewed and whatnot. And I just want to do a couple more things before modeling. Sorry this is a little long-winded, but setting up our references accurately really does help. Number one, you'll notice that our image isn't quite centered. And this is actually kind of confusing because you'll notice that the center of the grill here is a little bit offset, but then the emblem is pretty dead center. And so we're actually going to go ahead and leave it as is, particularly since you'll notice that these two grid lines cut through this portion of the grill pretty equally. So we're just going to leave it as is. It'll be accurate enough. And then I also want to take the blend down to 0.25 on each of them. This will just make the car a little easier to see through our mesh object, but not be so much that it blurs out our mesh object. And the last thing I want to do before actually modeling, we can go and close these windows. The last thing I want to do is go ahead and add another view down here, which I'm going to set to the image editor, and I'm going to set it to that 3/4 version of the car, of the orange version. And I'll show you what this will allow us to do here in just a second. So we're going to right click on the divider and split area, and then just left click. And we don't need this to be very big. And then we want to change the window type to a UV image editor, and we'll open a new image. And in this case, I need to navigate to my references, and we're going to pull this up just so we can see it. And actually, this is exactly what we're going to do, is with your mouse over this so that we can see it, hit Shift Space. And this maximizes this viewport, which is actually exactly what we're going to use this panel for, because now we have a large reference that we can easily access. We can zoom in anywhere we want, we can move it around, and it's all right here. We can also move it around here, so it's just big enough to access for details, say for example if we're modeling the headlights here. But it doesn't distract our modeling. It still gives us plenty of space to work with, but if we need to quickly zoom in, rather than switching to another application such as the Windows Picture Viewer or Preview in OS X or your app of choice in Linux, we can just simply move over, Shift Space, okay, find the detail we want, good to go, and get back to modeling. So this is just a nice workflow tip that really can be very, very beneficial. But enough blabbering, let's go ahead and get started. In order to model this effectively, what we want to do is go ahead and do a plane or a edge by edge method, and we're going to kind of section off the car and work on just a piece at a time. The reason we're not going to do a box modeling technique for this car, and for cars in general, at least what I have found, is that when working on a car and doing box modeling, since you're working from two primary angles at a time, your mesh very quickly becomes confusing. And strictly on a visual point, it's hard to tell what's what when you're working with it, even though the mesh may be very, very clean. And also, since we're working with a subject that is naturally pieced together in panels, we might as well work this way as well. Since if we work as a box modeling, then we're just going to have to constantly be splitting pieces off, separating here, separating there, adding new seams, etc. And so we might as well just do this from the get-go. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. Do keep in mind that with this tutorial, we will not be modeling any of the interior or any of the really fine details like the inside of the wheel wells to the bottom of the car. We might go so far as to model the windshield wipers and things like that, but we're primarily focusing on the form of the car and something that would pass inspection on a beauty render. So what I want to do is from this from the front view, first off hit Shift C to make sure that your cursor is centered at the viewport, and then just hit spacebar, add mesh plane, and then we want to hit tab to go into edit mode, and let's hit Control R to immediately add a loop cut right down the center, but you want to middle click so that it places it directly in the center of the mesh. And then we're going to deselect that by hitting A to toggle deselection, and then we just want to right click and shift right click on these two vertices, hit X and delete vertices. This will then allow us to go over to the editing buttons and add a new modifier. I'm going to move this panel over so I can see it better. Add a modifier, mirror, and then we'll turn on do clipping and enable the cage draw during edit mode. And so now we have a mirrored mesh, as we've done in many, many tutorials in the past. And I'm going to start with the most prominent object, and that is the hood of the car. And so let's first go ahead and just select everything with A, and just hit R to rotate it, and then move it over with G to the general location of the hood. Okay, and I want to go ahead and position the top vertices here, right at the top of the hood, as we can see along this side view. Remember, we're going to use the side view as our primary reference, and then the front view just for shape and positioning. And we'll deselect that and grab the bottom of vertices, again using B for box select, and we want to position it right where it goes as well. And if you look from the top view, you can see it's right about the bottom of the headlights. And if you look here, you can see what appears to be the Porsche emblem. And so we're going to go ahead and place this right about there. And in this case, they actually line up pretty nicely. And we can see this, again, it lines up right with the bottom of the headlights, which you can also see this here is the bottom of the headlights. And so maybe we need to move down a little further. And then what I want to do is go ahead and let's position each of these side vertices. So we're going to grab this one, hit G and X, move it over, and then we'll move it down to about here. And the nice thing is here is with this view, we can really focus on just the specific details that we're looking at. And in this case, you can see this here pretty much goes straight over. And so we're just going to position this right about there, right where that seam is. And you can see this from the top view too. It's just a smooth curve over. And from the front view here, we're going to move this one over like so. And since this has a curve to the hood, we want to maybe pull this back along the y-axis like that. Okay. And now we can go ahead and add in some edge loops to add some shape to this curve. So let's just hit Control R, and we'll scroll up, say, twice. We don't want to add too many loops too quickly, and just left click. So this will add 2 more loops that allow us to then just hit G and Z. And I'm also going to hold down Shift and just move it up just slightly, although we actually want to go ahead and select the... Oh, no, excuse me. We're just going to go straight up along the Z axis, just slightly, just to add that slight curve to it. Now we do need to be careful not to go any higher than the central point. And so if we need to go higher overall, we can go ahead and just select that, add it to the selection by Alt-Shift, right-click, and we'll pull it up along the Z-axis some more. There we go. This will just begin to give us a nice arc. And we're going to take the modeling on this car pretty slow in comparison to a lot of objects that we've modeled, because we do want it to be nicely precise, particularly since it is a mechanical object. And so we'll be doing this tutorial in multiple parts. This corner here, since we need this nice curve like this, and currently we have the opposite of that, I'm just going to pull it along the Z-axis by G and Z, and then maybe up a little bit along the Z. There we are. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and leave that there, because I want to go ahead and fill in a few other spaces so we can start to get the feeling of the entire car, and then we'll begin piecing things together. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is pick out a couple of foundation objects that really give me a good reference point. And that is the circle around the headlights, the wheel well, and perhaps this center grille here. And so let's go ahead and from the side view, let's position our cursor right at the center of the wheel. And then we'll also move it right over to about there from the side view, and then reposition on the side view again. So we now have our cursor perfectly positioned. And from the side view here, we're going to hit spacebar, add circle. And I'm going to go ahead and use 12 vertices. We don't want to keep it, we don't want to get too dense too quickly. And then we'll just scale it down to fit this line right here. There we are. And then we're going to go ahead and hit E to extrude on the edges, hit S to scale, and then just pull it in to that inside edge there. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and deselect everything with A, and then B to box select, and select this bottom half, and hit X and delete vertices. And then I'm going to go ahead and select this side, and we're going to pull it up along the Z axis, left click, and then hit S and Z, and then 0 on your number pad to scale it down to 0 to make it flat. And then we'll also pull it back along the Y axis like this. We're just creating this nice flat plane that you see there, this nice sharp ridge. And we'll do the same thing over here. There we are. Okay, and obviously it's not exact yet, but that's okay, because we're going to again do it as we go slowly. Okay, so that's that. Now let's go ahead and add in the same thing, but this time for the headlights. So first, from the front view, let's go ahead and position our cursor right center on the headlights, and then centered directly here as well. And we can see from the side view that this is probably more accurate than the top, so we'll do that. And from the front view, or excuse me, from the front, rather than the side, and from the front view, we're going to hit spacebar, add, circle again. This time I'm only going to use 8 vertices since it is a smaller diameter. And we're going to rotate it just so that my edges are flat, as you can see right about there. And then we're going to scale it down to fit the size of our headlight. Okay, and you can see that from the side here, this is maybe a little too large. We'll move it down slightly and scale it down until it fits, since again, the side profile is our primary reference. And now what I'm going to do is use a really cool feature called Shear in Blender to create this shear effect, because if we just rotate it, then we don't have a perfect circle from the front like we want. So instead, we're going to hit Control S, and you can see that we begin to shear it. Now this tool is a little finicky in that it can take a while to do what you want. So we're going to zoom way out and hit Control S, and then go out like so. And we may need to do that a couple of times. It works in very small increments, and right about there should work. But you'll notice from the front view, we still have pretty much a perfect circle that otherwise we would not have. Okay, and so at this point, let's go ahead and hit E to extrude, right click, and we're going to actually, in this time, we'll go ahead and scale in. So we'll scale it in just a little bit, and there we go. So now we have our wheel wells, our headlights, and our hood set up, and these give us a good reference point to start connecting things. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I want to start creating this nice arc here that really forms the shape of the car. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull it straight up and over from the wheel. So we'll just hit E to extrude on this edge, take it up we're going to take it all the way to the top actually, and then from the front view, we'll pull it in along the x-axis. When we rotate a little, pull it up a little further, and then we're going to extrude it again. And you'll notice that I'm making it fit this circle here because I want to go ahead and connect these vertices like this. I'm going to shift right click on all of them and hit F to create those faces, or that face. And we want to be very careful with everything that we do because we need everything to line up well, but also be very smooth and sharp. And that's one of the difficulties that cars present, is that in many ways it is a organic surface, particularly with a sports car like this, because it does have all these beautiful flowing curves, but then has all the sharp edges at the same time. So it's really almost a mix of hard body and organic modeling, and that can present quite the challenge at times. All right, let's go ahead and we're going to take this straight back past the mirror here, but I want to go ahead and extrude it from right here because you can see that this path right here kind of continues back. Although before we do that, actually, let's go ahead and add in another edge loop here. We're going to just middle click to put it right in the center. And then we're going to take this out along the X and slightly along the Z to kind of accentuate that curve there. Remember, this is a very nice flowing curve. Because then we're going to take this edge. One trick you can use, particularly with the references here, is notice where the highlights end. You can see that the highlight on this curve from the lighting stops right here. And this is the fall-off point on that curve, at which point it should be pointing this direction more than this direction. And so we want to keep that edge, in this case right here, that edge that we just put in, right about that fallout point. Now, this is not a set set in stone technique. It's just something, a little trick that you can use here and there when you take into account where this lighting is positioned, which if you look at our reference here, you can see that the highlights are pretty even, particularly on the windshield here. So you can guess that the lighting for the lighting source is directly in the center and pretty top down. You can see that some of the highlights are slightly to the left here. So the light is probably right about this direction. And so that gives us a pretty clear indication of where these curves fall off. So we're going to extrude this straight back, and we're going to take it right back to this scene because we want to go ahead and model this in panels. And so we're going to model it right into here. So we're just going to extrude this straight back, and we're going to go right up until the bottom vertice hits that scene. And then we're going to grab the top vertice, pull it back even further along the y-axis. There we are. And we're going to leave it pretty much like that. We're not going to do anything from the front view since this is pretty much a straight back shot. And we can see this more clearly if we go in full view. We may need to add a little bit of a slope back, but we can adjust that later as we needed. Because remember, we're going to keep our mesh fairly light in order to keep it easily workable and to get it as accurate as possible. And then we will go in and really sharpen things up and add extra loops and whatnot. But until that point, we want to keep things pretty light. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and just fill in this space. So we're just going to take these 3 vertices, and we're just going to extrude them straight back along the y-axis, and then let's scale to 0 along the y by hitting S, Y, and 0. And we'll pull it right in, like so. And then let's go ahead and add in another loop here, which we will then line up with this vertex. Remember, that's Control R, and we're going to scale along the y-axis just a little bit, so it's S and Y, just to straighten out that edge. This will then allow us to go ahead and connect these 4 vertices and these 4 vertices to form that face. We will then go in and add another loop here in a little bit to help out this curve here, but for the time being, we don't want to worry about that. All right, let's continue on. Let's go ahead and move on to this area here. Let's fill that in. And so for the time being, I'm going to go and select the hood by moving my mouse over just one of the vertices connected to it and hit L. And this will select everything that's linked underneath the vertice, underneath the cursor. And let's just hit H to hide it, because this will give us a better view from the side view without it being distracting so that we can model this area here. You'll notice that this vertice here lines up pretty well with this seam, so let's go ahead and just connect it with that. And we can also see that it lines up pretty well here. And this is actually really nice because these faces, the edge angles line up quite nicely. So let's just go ahead and hit F between these 2 vertices, which will create that edge, which we can see that we then want to subdivide it by W and subdivide, and we'll just pull this down. And you'll notice that this edge here is perfectly straight. So let's go ahead and grab this edge, and we're going to hit Control E and Edge Slide. And we're just going to slide it down just a little bit right to about there, because in the long run, it's not going to matter that these are perfectly spaced, perfectly evenly spaced. It will on the wheel, but on the wheel well, it doesn't matter as much, particularly because we will be adding more edges in, and we can create that perfect circle later on. But for the time being, we want these edges, our defining edges, to really be accurate. Okay, there we are. We're going to leave that as is. Yeah, that ought to be close enough. And then let's go ahead and take this vertice, and we're just going to, well, first we'll pull it out a little bit because we want this curve to be smooth, as you can see there. And we're going to extrude it up like this, because what we want to do is then connect these faces and give us a point that we can connect into this loop here. So we're continuing that edge loop. And so we can see that this is not going to fill in well. So we actually need to go ahead and add in another loop here by Control R, middle click, at which point we can go ahead and fix that curve a little bit, being sure to do it from the side view such that we keep this flat plane. Because remember, when you look at the reference, that's pretty much completely flat. Maybe not so much in the front here, but on the side. So we want to keep that. And so we're going to fill in these spaces. Pull that back down. And we can then fill in these. And we can look at this and see how do we want to do this. So you can see that we've got 3 vertices here, which would connect well if we had another loop here, and then we could fill that. So let's go and add in another loop right there. And don't worry if you feel like it's getting a little too dense right there, because really it's not. Any denser than this, we would want to begin to worry, but for the time being, this should be fine. And so you can see that we're creating a very nice flowing form here. Just as with character modeling, when working with cars, the topology is absolutely essential that it be pristine and clean. When you've got so many different lines, so many different shapes connecting together, it's very important that we have a very clean mesh that we can work with well, particularly because that will allow us to really define the different shapes that we're working with. I want to go ahead and be sure to save my file before I lose anything. And let's continue on. I want to go ahead and finish off this section here before going any further, and at which point we'll then probably move on to this area. So let's finish this off. First off, we can see we've got this empty space that we can very easily fill, so let's just go ahead and select these two vertices. And from the front view, we're just going to extrude it, and we're going to pull it up right about there. And you can see that this slope here kind of goes up like this, and it's only towards the headlight that it kind of forms a circle. And so we're going to just gradually pull these up just a little bit, and we'll pull this one up slightly. We're going to kind of average out between the side view and the front view, because remember, the side view is also from a slight top down, as you can see, slightly into the car and behind and whatnot. And so we still have to do some approximation. We can't take this exactly for granted. And then we can fill in this face here. Alrighty. Now I want to go ahead and we're going to just select these three vertices, and we're going to hit E to extrude, and then just scale out slightly and pull them out as well. And then we will work with the shape as we need to. But first I want to go ahead and select and fill in that face there. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and, I want to go ahead and extrude these over and pull this line in here. This will also provide an edge here, which I can then extrude all the way up along this seam. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're just going to extrude it out, and then we'll rotate slightly. And we can see that the edge of the hood is right about here, so that's where that ought to line up there. Because you can see, the way I can tell is that you see this line here is pretty well lined up with this. And you can see that the edge of that headlight is right there, and we've got that line approximately somewhere in there. So you can begin to see why this is a tedious process, but also it can be a very rewarding process, particularly if you're a car enthusiast, which, to be honest, I'm not. One of the reasons that it took me so long to do a car tutorial in the first place, even though it was so highly requested. But it is a very rewarding thing, particularly since results can be outstanding when done right. And so hopefully at the end of this tutorial, you will feel a little more comfortable on the process of modeling a car. And hopefully we will see a few really good car models pop up from the result of this tutorial. And so we're going to go ahead and continue extruding this out. So let's just extrude straight out like this and in along the x-axis, at which point we can go ahead and connect these. Now, one thing I am noticing that I don't like is that we are going to get what appears to be a little bit of a pinch here. And I also don't like that this isn't the same as this side of the mesh. And that's partially just me being picky, but also because we're not going to get the detail that we want here, and we're not going to be able to add in another loop all the way across here. That's going to continue on down like that, which I don't like. And so we're going to select this edge and hit V to rip it and pull it back like this. And then we will position it, we'll scale it in along the x-axis and position it right about in somewhere in there. And then we're going to extrude it again out to those vertices, which this then allows us to fill in this face, which in turn will allow us to add another loop in there if we need to. So it's just, controlling our topology very carefully. And that's one thing where working around these circular shapes, such as the headlights, can be a bit intimidating and also a bit tricky at times. Okay, we can go ahead and continue just extruding this straight back, like so. And you'll notice that we want to gradually increase this such that before it's lower than this, and then it gets higher and becomes the peak of this curve. And so we want to do this very gradually. And we'll do that here. And again, here. And we'll pull these out. And you'll notice that we really kind of have to compensate between these two. And this is where tweaking, once we build the complete model, will really come in. once we have the entire model built, we can look at it as a whole, compare it to our relevant references, such as this one here and others, and see how the shape on our model is off and what we need to do to fix that. Because that will be very, very important. Because chances are, based on the reference differences in our references and whatnot, that the shape, as accuracy goes, will be quite different and a fair bit off. But that is why, as a modeler, you will spend a large amount of time tweaking your models. In fact, in the modeling process, it's quite common to spend just a short time creating the original model and then hours upon hours tweaking the model. In fact, I think with most of my own models, I spend more time tweaking it than I do modeling the initial shape. And, although that may not be the case for everyone, I would say that that is quite common within the modeling world. And so, if you find yourself at that point, don't get discouraged, because it happens to the best of us. Okay, so we're coming along quite nicely here. As you can see, this curve obviously is going to be fixed. We'll add in extra loops here, which will help meet those. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and continue this shape on through here. And something that I like is this edge here is already set to just go right around here. And so let's just do that. So let's extrude this once down, and we're going to rotate it. And we'll rotate along here and also this way, because we want to fit that form well. And you can see that this is actually working out pretty well, because this should be just below the hood line, which it is. And so then we'll extrude it again, rotate, pull it out along the y-axis. And you can see this is actually looking quite good, because this lines up pretty closely with that, and it's also in the center there, so this is working. And we'll maybe pull it out a little further along the y-axis, and then we're just going to extrude it straight into the center and pull it out to the furthest point, like so. And we'll maybe pull this one out a little further, pull it in a little, and then we'll maybe add in one more loop there to just smooth out that shape. Okay, so it's looking good. We're making good progress. I know that this is definitely a long process, and I hope that you guys are able to stick with me throughout it, because I think hopefully, or if all goes well, the results will be very, very satisfying. At this point, we're going to go ahead and extrude this straight down, and I'm going to take it down to this edge here. Since we've got this inset, we're going to need to change our mesh topology as we go, and so I don't want to go any further down than that. And that's pretty much a straight shot down, so we'll leave that as is. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll do the same thing here. We'll extrude this down. And we're going to leave that pretty much as is, and then we'll fill in these, which you can see that this is slightly off, so we'll pull that in and pull this out just a little bit to smooth that out. And then your first thought may be that we want to connect this here, and this in fact was my first thought as well, just like that. But this is not the case actually, because we want this corner edge to continue all the way down to here where we see this sharp edge along there. And so what we want to do is add in another loop here, because that will then allow us to connect this here, but also extrude this out and fill this in and maintain that sharp edge. And so this is very, very good, because it also then allows us to continue this thought, extrude this out like so, and pull this down, and continue these faces then along here. So you can start to see how a car model is very, very strongly influenced by its topology, and the quality of the car really shines by its topology as well. Not just from a visual standpoint, but from a technical standpoint. And so you can see, this is beginning to come out well. Okay. You'll notice that this edge that I've created here gives us the perfect place to extrude this down. And so we'll just go ahead and extrude it down. And this is pretty much a straight shot, so we'll leave that as is. And you'll notice that it's a little low, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Since again, this is coming from a top angle down, this is going to appear, well actually I guess that's not completely true. I was going to say that it would appear longer, but in fact it would appear shorter. But due to the angle, we're also seeing more depth on this, and so this is lining up here when in fact if this was a straight shot, it would probably line up right about there. So we're going to leave that as is. And also, again, we are compensating between the two. We can see that this has become a problem because this ought to be straight shot. One thing you will notice is that our lights are very, very different here. And so I want to actually select this whole area because from here out, it's pretty flat. So we'll just select all this and scale it up and then pull it out. And even though that's not completely accurate, you know, we're seeing the edge of the light here, but it's going to be enough that we can, compensate between the two and then tweak it later down the road if we need to. Again, the tweaking is going to be essential on this model and honestly on any car model. Okay, let's continue. So we're going to go ahead and we'll continue this line along here. So let's just first extrude this here, and then we'll fill that vertex face. And we want to pull this back as well. And we're going to extrude that there. We'll fill in this, which we can see if we look at this. This is pretty much a smooth curve through here. And you can see we're definitely going to have to add in some extra geometry because this kind of comes down right here, and then we have a bit of a dip right in this area here. And so, you know, we'll be able to achieve that through this and other means, but for the time being, we want to create a nice smooth mesh. And so I'm going to pull these out, and we're going to pull this out. So we want this line to be smooth like this. Okay. And so then we will continue that on back. Pull that back to the edge there. And we can see how we want to connect these. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and extrude this vertex straight up, or kind of at an angle, and fill this in, because that then will allow us to fill this in. Oh, okay, I'm going to have to do some smoothing here. There we go, we can fill that in, which gives us this control here, and all the while we can still add in loops there. So it gives us 3 different points which we can further control our mesh. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and continue this straight on back, and we'll just line that up nicely there. Pull this out slightly, and then we can go ahead and add in 2 loops here, which will then fix that curve as well and fill that shape. Okay, we're making really good progress here. We won't go too much longer on this part of the tutorial for both your sanity and mine. I know that these tutorials can get pretty long at times. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of what we do, in that there's a lot of information. But hopefully, in the end, you come out having learned something and hopefully enjoyed the tutorial as well. So that's one of the end goals, of course. Hey, and you'll notice, since we added this loop here and the terminating loop here, this is very nice because we can very quickly add in another edge loop there, which will also allow us to control this curve even more, and we can fill in this space. So you can really see how, as long as we pay attention to our topology and we're very careful with it, and we think in advance what we're going to need to do, then, you know, creating something like this is not nearly as a challenge as it might seem, particularly from a topological standpoint. Okay, so we are almost done with this portion. What I want to do, you know, the last steps here is we're going to fill in this space, and then we're going to fill in the rest of the hood. And then we'll move on to more portions of the car and whatnot. So this, you know, this tutorial will be a little drawn out because there is an awful lot of information to cover. To do a full car modeling tutorial in one video would be obscene, to say the least. So let's go ahead and continue. So what I want to do now is we want to fill in this space. So I'm going to start by adding another edge loop here, which will allow me to extrude this shape out. And so we will just do that. And I'm going to just extrude it straight back, or straight across actually. And we'll just pull it back just slightly. We can compare it here and see that it comes right to about there, and it has a slight curve back. And so that's just about right. Another thing that you can notice is that we're definitely looking at this car from a slight angle. And actually, I may have this version of the car may be slightly different than this one, because this one definitely appears to have a little more curve on the front than this version of the car, which we can actually confirm or else deny by looking at other references. And in fact, I was wrong in that it's not straight on. It's just a illusion from the photography, since this does have this nice curve here. And so we just need to, as long as we're aware of that, we can compensate for it. And so I'm going to pull that back a little further even. Okay, and we'll pull that. And then I'm going to extrude it straight back here and there. Which one? I'm going to add another loop there, and we will fill these areas. Okay, now I want to go ahead and fill in this space right here. And looking at this, what I want to do is we first need to define this edge right in here. And because it is, if we look at this again, you can see it's slightly further back than this. So we really need a face loop along here, here, and then right along the edge. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate these, and this is going to be the surface loop here. And so I'm actually going to go ahead and split this. Okay, that's not wanting to work. So I'm actually going to select this edge, split it. Sometimes it can be a little finicky. There we are. I'm going to scale it down, and I'm going to rotate it back like this. And we're going to pull this one back a little further, because this is going to be that edge in here. And so I'm going to then extrude this down, which I will also connect here. And don't worry if this starts to get a little dense, because what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to merge down, say, these three loops here, which I'm going to just show an example, would merge those three down, continue all the way back, and then merge this into a single quad. Since this is a flat shape here, we don't need to worry about that too much. So we'll fill these. Okay, it's looking good. And now I want to actually, this is nice because this will allow us to continue this edge loop around here. And so I'm going to do just that, like this. Continuing with our solid topology. And I do apologize to all those car enthusiasts out there that may be watching this if I make any drastic, blasphemous mistakes in the car world in terms of anything from terminology to small details. Like I said before, I am not a car person. I don't normally model them, but like any other object, when approached from a modeling stance versus I guess you could say a car stance even, it's much the same as any other object. It's just a matter of working through it, figuring out where your edges are, where your details are, where your topology needs to flow and whatnot, and you can work it out. But if I do happen to make any drastic, blasphemous mistakes, please forgive me. Okay, continuing on. I want to go ahead and we're going to pull this back slightly, because you can see we have this edge here. And I'm going to extrude this straight down to meet with this, which can then also pull this in and extrude it up and in. Maybe scale along the y-axis to flatten it out, because then we can merge that and even extrude this in to fill these. So that's creating that shape there. Even though we're not focusing on details yet, there are some details that we can't ignore because they determine our topology. And those are the really important ones that we need to pay attention to. Okay, continuing. We want to, since we have this sharp edge, we're going to continue this straight down through here. So I'll just extrude it, rotate, extrude, and then extrude it straight in. And then we need to kind of figure out how we want to tackle this area here. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to add in, or actually I'm going to take this edge, I'm going to hit Control E and slide it to that point where this merges in. So then I'm going to extrude this down to the bottom there. And then we're going to go ahead and take these three vertices, we're going to first add in another loop here, which will then merge right there. And we can smooth these out a little bit. There we go. Because I'm going to take these three vertices and we're going to hit E to extrude, scale it in, pull it down, and this then gives us a point where we can pull these back like this and then continue this shape back here. So we'll extrude this. I actually need to add one more loop in here. And we'll worry about smoothing that out later. Because then I'm going to take this down, fill these, and this allows us to, we can even actually, we want to actually pull that back out a little bit, because this is basically going to be a smooth transition straight back, like so. In fact, I want to smooth that a little further even. Okay. And we'll pull that up, because then we can extrude this down. And we're going to do, I'm first going to extrude this through here, pull it back, and then we'll extrude in like this, rotate around, and pull it out to line up there, such that we can fill these. And you can see we need to pull these back further to line these up. Whether they line up with the car correctly or not yet doesn't really matter. What matters is that the mesh lines up together. As you can see, this is pretty much one flowing edge through here, and so we want to continue that. And I'm going to fill this space. Let's see, what I need to do is pull these back. Like this, because then I can fill this area here, which will allow me to get this smooth transition like this. Because then what we'll do is we'll take this entire area and we're going to extrude it in, scale down slightly, pull back just slightly, and then extrude it in like so, and maybe scale down and pull up slightly. There you go. So you can really see how that kind of detail is going to start coming out. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll go ahead, smooth some of these areas out, and we're going to extrude, scale down a little bit, pull in a little bit, and then we'll extrude back again. And we will, adjust those further as we need to later on. And once again, do the same thing here. More than anything, this helps us see the details right now. Okay, so the last two things we need to do is fill in this space here and then adjust the hood to fit. And then we're not going to worry about anything else because that's all going to be, actually we've got one small area right in here as well. And then the details and things like that will come later. And I'm also going to leave the bottom fender, bumper, you name it, whatever it is, for later as well, because we are getting pretty long here. So first on this area, let's just take these two vertices and we're going to pull them straight back. We'll add in the necessary loops and fill in these areas. And then do any smoothing as we need to, so we'll line these up better. We'll pull those in. It gives us one nice smooth surface. I want to go and add in another loop here, because this will allow us to smooth this transition out. Okay. And then last thing is we want to go ahead and pull these down one, fill these, and fill these. And we're going to pull this down. Actually, I'm going to step back one, and I want to go ahead and extrude this down. And we're going to extrude this down as well, and then fill this here, and these here, and then extrude this down, fill these, and fill these. And then we're going to select this, position our cursor right about here, hit period, and scale down along the z-axis like that. This is because we want this area, when we look at it, is pretty much a flat plane. We can see this is pretty much straight flat, although in front there we need to pull it a little further. So we can pull this back up, deselect this part, and then pull these down, because this here is going to be parallel to the ground. And so it's looking like we're actually going to need to do a little bit of adjustment with our mesh right here, but we're not going to worry about that for now, because this is pretty much as far as I would like to go for the time being. I want to do a little smoothing here. And what I'm going to do is add in 2 loops here. And I want to select this entire area, and from the top view, look down and pull it along the z-axis until it basically lines up with this curve here, or fairly close to it. Just get a little more curve on that. We'll pull this back as well, and you can see we need to pull these out because this ought to be a pretty even plane there. Okay, so let's fill in this little spot here and then do the hood real quick, and we will be done for the day. Hope you all are hanging in there. So looking at this, we can go ahead and fill in a couple of the obvious faces like this. We can see we're going to need to add another loop here because we simply don't have the geometry to match here. So I'm then also going to select this edge and hit Control E and edge slide. And what that'll do is just smooth out that geometry a little bit. We'll also smooth this one. Since it kind of averages out, it gives me a nice smooth curve there, rather than the hard edge that I had. So then I can fill in these faces and these faces all the way up to the edge here. Adjust my geometry to fit. And then what I would do then is probably add in another loop here that would then pull this back, compensating between the two. We'll maybe select these vertices in here and hit W smooth a couple of times, just smooth those out. Let's bring this down just slightly, just to again smooth out the angles between the edges. We want to try and keep them fairly straight whenever possible, just to keep a nice clean mesh. Okay, and that pretty much does all the work. Just for the sake of consistency, we're going to go ahead and hit E to extrude, and remember to hit comma on your keyboard to scale that back in. Actually, I'm not going to do that because one thing you'll notice, if you look at this, this edge continues on along here and through there and then around. And so I'm going to actually leave this as is because we're going to work with it as a detail point later. So let's save this and let's do the hood real quick. For the hood, what I'm going to do is from top view, I'm going to go in and look. First off, we want to smooth out this curve here. This ought to be a nice smooth curve. And then we can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges of sorts. And this doesn't necessarily matter since they are going to be separate objects, but I want these to line up for consistency's sake because it will make lining up the curves of objects easier later down the road. So we'll go ahead and add in, so we've got 1, we'll go ahead and do just that. This is getting a little dense just for the time being down here, and so I'm not going to follow that. But now we can go in and one curve at a time, just Alt right click on it and pull it up to fit. Grab this. Notice it evens out right about there, so right about this one. I'm going to scale this along the Z-axis, pull it up just slightly further. Smooth that out. Smooth that out. And you can see we can then pull these in or out. Get that curve going on there. And that is pretty much it for this portion of the car modeling tutorial.